This is a download from the BBC. To find out more, visit bbc.co.uk/Radio 4.
Hello, what is it about True Grit that makes it a Western to revisit? And why have American audiences so loved the Coen brothers version? We'll be hearing from its young star, Hailee Steinfeld, while Sir Christopher Frayling will consider the two versions more than 40 years apart. Also, Keira Knightley, one of the trio of actors in the bleak drama Never Let Me Go, on the challenges that British cinema can still offer. Author Jonathan Coe will be appreciating the mysterious power of the 1950s films of Kenji Mitsuguchi, and David O. Russell, director of The Fighter, on the risks of portraying a squabbling family on screen when they can turn up on set every day. First, though, True Grit, a film that Americans have flocked to see. A modest budget by Hollywood standards has yielded rising $150 million in sales since its release in December. From this weekend, British audiences get the chance to assess what the Coen brothers have done with Charles Portis's novel about a 14-year-old girl who hires a drunken old marshal to track down her father's killer. She first approaches Marshal Rooster Cogburn with her offer of employment in an exchange that illustrates the speed and the pitch of the dialogue.
There is a fugitive warrant out for Cheney. Government will pay you $2 for bringing him in, plus 10 cents a mile for each of you. On top of that, I will pay you a $50 reward.
What are you?
Nobody here knew my father, and I'm afraid nothing is going to be done about Cheney except I do it. My brother is a child, and my mother is indecisive and hobbled by grief.
I don't believe you have $50.
I have a contract with Colonel Stonehill, which he will make payment on tomorrow or the next day, once a lawyer countersigns.
Don't believe in fairy tales or sermons or stories about money, baby sister, but thanks for the cigarette.
She's looking for a man of true grit, Hailee Steinfeld, as 14-year-old Mattie Ross, a solemn avenger in pigtails, there with Jeff Bridges as Rooster Cogburn. In the original 1969 film, Mattie was played by Kim Darby, who was 21 at the time. The Coen brothers cast an actress who will not turn 15 until next December. Not that you'd guess it from hearing her talk. Hailee Steinfeld spoke to me from Berlin, where True Grit opened the film festival. How did she hear about the role?
I actually heard about it through my mom's cousin. She heard it on the news that they were doing an open call. My mom called my agent and said, is there any way we could get in on this? They said that the Coen brothers were in New York, so if they come back, we could possibly get you in. So I had been studying the material, the sides that were, available online. There were about 15 pages, and I was just going over them, and I was called in. I read the first week of January, and I got a call back 2 days later to read with Ellen Chenoweth, who's the casting director of the film. And at that point, they told us it would be a month if we were to hear anything at all, and it was 5 weeks later that I got called in to read for the Coen brothers.
So when you looked at those first few pages online, what struck you about the dialogue?
Well, the fact that it was very difficult. I actually watched the original True Grit, and that was really helpful in terms of kind of putting me in the mindset of the character and hearing the way they spoke, the language. And so that was very helpful. And then after I heard it a little bit, I was able to just read it as it was written. The way the Coen brothers, wrote the script is just very sing-song-like.
Because, in fact, your delivery is quite different, although you said you watched Kim Darby in the original. It's quite different from hers. And there is this sort of added solemnity and, as you say, a kind of rhythm to it. And is that something that the Coens kind of instructed on set?
No, I think that they, left that up to us, but it really was never something that had to be discussed in any way. It just kind of, like I said, it happened. And I think that for me, the biggest thing was I had to make sure that I understood what everything meant, of course. And then I had to go back through and make sure that I could understand what it meant to me and how I could relate to it in my own life. And then in terms of the accent, that just kind of came.
So were there lines that were particularly challenging?
The scene where it's Mattie in Rooster's bedroom in the back of the Chinese grocer, and she's just like spitting these words out. And it was so, complicated at first because it's such a mouthful. I couldn't mumble. It had to be very articulate, and everybody, I had to make sure that everybody understood it. In fact, sometimes I'd be in the middle of it and I'd be like, okay, I've got to start over. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore.
I wonder if anybody has mentioned the fact that Kim Darby, who was in the original 1969, she was hailed as a great newcomer at the time, although she was actually considerably older than you when she made it, but actually subsequently didn't do a great deal. Has anybody pointed that out? Do you think that that's any kind of concern?
Well, I actually got the chance to talk to Kim Darby a few months ago. She looked at me and she said, please, for me, choose the right things, make the right choices, take your time, don't be in a rush. There's plenty of things out there. And honestly, that's, some really good advice given from somebody who has been there.
So what would you like to do? Do you have any sense at the moment?
I guess I don't, because when I first started, I had no expectations or anything, and I ended up doing a Western, a genre that I've just been introduced to this past year. So honestly, I think it really, for me, comes down to falling in love with the role and the story. It's kind of what it comes down to for me.
And had you ever seen any of the other Coen brothers films?
Yeah, actually, I've seen a few. Raising Arizona is probably one of my favorite Coen brothers films. I love Holly Hunter. I think she was amazing. She was so funny. I don't know. I just love the fact that if you watch 5 films not knowing who made them, you could kind of almost pick out which one the Coen brothers made. It's almost like, they have that touch that they put on every one of their films. And so I don't know. I think Raising Arizona is a really good example of it.
I just realised you're probably too young to go and see some of the Coen brothers films in the cinema anyway.
I am. Most of them are rated R.
Hailee Steinfeld, who plays Mattie Ross in True Grit, is a very different portrayal from Kim Darby in the 1969 version. Well, Sir Christopher Frayling, who's the man you want to hire if you want to track down a Western, is here. OK, let's look at the two films together. What, to you, are the essential differences?
The look of it is very different. In the 1969 one, it's very lush. It's the fall and lots of national parks where it was shot with glacier mountains in the background. This one, Roger Deakins, British cinematographer, like most of the Coen brothers films, is completely desaturated of colour. It's very bleak. Everything's scrubland. None of the trees have any leaves on them. It's a sort of Samuel Beckett landscape. Interestingly, the original novel set in Arkansas, neither landscape of the films resembles Arkansas at all, neither the 69 one. This was actually shot in New Mexico and Texas. Rather like No Country for Old Men, where they made New Mexico look like a used car dump. It's that sort of look. So there's no attempt to make it look beautiful. There's the fact that the little girl, the 14-year-old girl, is the narrator this time round. So she is the central guy. She's in everything. It's almost seen from her point of view the entire film, whereas in the previous film, Kim Darby sort of co-starred with John Wayne.
The thing that surprised me was that the dialogue, which I thought was very Coen brothers, is actually there in the original film.
Yes, and in the original novel. The novel came out in 67, 68, and it's deliberately archaic. It was at a time when the Western was beginning to morph into costume drama. It had ceased to be a sort of genre where people spoke like Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, or whatever, and it was distanced. The little girl speaks a mixture of scripture and legalese throughout. No abbreviations, I do not know this man, all that sort of thing, which makes it sound like a sort of patchwork quilt of a film, almost. And, that was in the original novel. One thing, though, the Coen brothers say they went back to the novel rather than to the John Wayne film. There are actually several aspects of their film that can only have come from the John Wayne film. There's no eye patch in the novel. The great sort of confrontation with the bad guy, Ned Pepper, which looks like a medieval tournament, this great sort of shootout, which is shot from above, with Rooster famously putting the reins in his mouth and shooting in all directions, is shot almost identically in both films. So actually the Coen brothers owe more to John Wayne than they're admitting, but most of it comes from the original novel.
But the fact that there is no John Wayne in it does completely change the whole dynamic of the film.
Yeah, it turns Rooster Cogburn into a character. John Wayne brought with him his entire career as a Western actor, and we were all terribly surprised that he could act, and East Coast critics took him seriously for the first time in his life. East of the Mississippi, people were actually reviewing John Wayne nicely, and his Oscar and all the rest of it. But that was part of it, and the charisma came from that. Whereas Jeff Bridges underplays him very deliberately, I think, in order not to compare himself with Wayne. In fact, he's almost inaudible at times. He rambles on in this sort of bear-like way, sitting on his horse as if it's an armchair, like some sort of aged hippie. He's also much nastier than John. He's got bad teeth, he never changes his clothes, he's not a well-scrubbed character, which John Wayne tended to be, and he's very unpleasant to people in lots of different ways.
And why do you think it's been so successful in the States? Is it to do with the place that True Grit, the original film, occupies in American culture?
Partly, that pre-sells it. But also, I think everyone wants to see a good Western. Every film school graduate wants to make a John Ford movie. They've watched them all in film school and they've learned about Howard Hawks, John Ford, Anthony Mann, and they really want to do a Western, but no one will let them because nobody goes to see Westerns. So there's a sigh of relief when someone makes a Western that actually works. I think also at quite a deep level, there's things in this film that chime with America at the moment. It's about retribution, and retribution being not quite so simple as it looks. So you want to smack someone, but you go into lots of dark places before you actually get the chance. I think that's quite interesting. And it's also about how fundamentalism has to learn to humanise itself. So here's this little girl, Presbyterian, and in fact the soundtrack consists almost entirely of Presbyterian hymns, leaning on his everlasting arm, or what a friend we have in Jesus, and she's constantly quoting Scripture. So I think this idea of sort of fundamentalism needs to be questioned and humanised is possibly also something that's on Americans' minds at the moment.
It's Christopher Frenning, thank you very much indeed. And True Grit is on general release, Certificate 15, and the original 1969 version is in rep. You can catch it on Film 4 from time to time.